This is World Civilization. My name is Dr. Long. This video is about Ming China and its influence on East Asia. The Ming Dynasty, which ruled from 1368 to 1644 CE, replaced the Mongol Yuan dynasty in China, which came to an end in 1368 after a massive peasant revolt. The rulers of the Yuan dynasty had been Mongols, and for their part, the Ming dynasty was a family of ethnically Han Chinese. The rise of the Ming dynasty thus signaled an end to Mongol domination of China and a China independent of foreign domination in general. The Ming dynasty was conscientiously and purposely in favor of traditional Chinese culture, including Confucianism and the Confucian-trained civil service. This was a part of a return to traditional Chinese values. However, as China had such a huge infrastructure to maintain, including its extensive internal canal system and defensive walls on the frontier, a well-trained civil service was a must for the Chinese government. During the 15th and 16th centuries, the Mongols and other nomadic steppe peoples remained a threat to China. Indeed, in 1449, a Mongol army even captured a Ming emperor and briefly managed to enter Beijing. Because of these threats along the northern frontier, not to mention the previous Mongol rule of China, the Ming dynasty waged a number of wars along its northern frontier. In total, during the Ming dynasty, China waged 308 external wars, or an average of one war a year. To do so, the Mings built up an impressive infantry force for these wars and for their frontier defense. And this was a massive army. Under the Ming, from the 14th until the 16th century, China's army came to rely on gunpowder, with muskets and cannons for most of its weaponry. Also, China had built up a series of walls along its northern frontier prior to the Ming dynasty. During the Ming dynasty, however, these systems of walls and fortifications were improved and expanded, particularly between 1470 and 1644. And under the Ming, the modern Great Wall of China as we know it today took its shape. The Great Wall of China was a massive defensive structure. Nonetheless, it was not entirely effective in keeping out steppe warriors. It did, however, show the resolve of the Ming to defend China from nomadic foreign invaders from the steppes. In time, the Great Wall of China also became a symbol of Ming China's isolation and its insular nature. This later feature, this insular nature of Ming China, however, was far from inevitable. China not only had a large army, but it also had a large navy, about 3,800 ships in 1420. This easily gave China the capacity to explore. Indeed, under the Ming Dynasty, China embarked on an impressive series of naval explorations under the Admiral Zheng He, who lived from 1371 to 1433. Interestingly enough, Zheng He was a Chinese eunuch and a Muslim. Zheng He led 7 Chinese voyages of discovery from 1405 until 1433. These voyages included massive fleets. For instance, on Zheng He's first voyage in 1405, his fleet included 62 large ships, carrying a total of nearly 28,000 people. By way of comparison, Christopher Columbus's first voyage across the Atlantic in 1492 included only 3 ships and 89 men, a tiny force compared to Zheng He's. Zheng He also had large ships as well. Zheng He's largest vessel was 5 times as large as anything Europeans, such as the Portuguese and the Spanish, had in their time. China also had a much larger population and tax revenue to support its fleet, much bigger than Spain and Portugal put together. The Chinese government saw Zheng He's voyages as tribute voyages. Their primary purpose was to impress foreign nations with the power of China and to have them recognize China's supremacy and to pay it tribute. Zheng He's voyages went to India, Malaysia, the Persian Gulf, the Red Sea, and even to the east coast of Africa, where he brought back a giraffe as a present to the Emperor of China. So clearly, China had the capacity to explore, and realistically, while we'll never know, China could have gone further around Africa to Europe, or even around the Pacific to the Americas. But Confucian officials had other plans. In 1433, the government stopped the voyages entirely, and in the decades that followed, they entirely dismantled China's fleet. So why did China pull back from the rest of the world? As historian John Darwin notes in his book After Tamerlane, The Rise and Fall of Global Empires, 1400 to 2000, the question of why China pulled back from the world around 1433 has long puzzled historians and has been a great source of debate. One answer is that Confucian officials were not entirely incorrect to have seen Zheng He's voyages as frivolous and a waste of resources that China could not afford for its naval fleet. China did have significant defense concerns on its frontier that required a lot of money and men. However, another answer is that Confucian officials were too cautious and conservative. They were skeptical of merchants and trade. Likewise, they saw China as the center of the world, the Middle Kingdom, as they called it. And they did not think that the rest of the world had much to offer China. So they stayed home. As such, ending voyages of exploration in 1433 reflected an attitude of cultural superiority that meant, in a sense, China was a victim of its own success. Also, given their historical experiences with the Mongols, Chinese officials desired to isolate China from the world. But in any case, the increasing isolation of China after 1433 from the rest of the world had long-term consequences. In the centuries that followed, China would begin to fall behind the West technologically. In addition, while China stopped exploring in the 15th century, that century was the beginning of the age of European exploration and expansion to the Americas and beyond. While China retreated inwardly after 1433, it still had an enormous cultural impact on the rest of East Asia, especially Korea and Japan. China's Mongol Yuan dynasty had controlled Korea. However, Korea managed to obtain its independence from China towards the end of the Yuan dynasty and the beginning of the Ming dynasty. In 1392, the Chosun dynasty came to power in Korea. The Chosun dynasty ruled Korea from 1392 until 1897, a total of 505 years. Now, under the Chosun dynasty in Korea, the capital was moved to what is now the city of Seoul. And for some time, the Korean language adopted an alphabet that Koreans developed independently under the Chosun dynasty. Under the Chosun dynasty, Korea became even more of a Confucian society, both in family life and with its government civil service. Now, in contrast, and unlike China, and Japan for that matter, Korea under the Chosun came to include a substantial slave population, up to 30% of their population, making them quite different from the rest of East Asia. For its part, Japan had remained independent from China. China's Mongol Yuan dynasty had attempted to invade Japan in 1274, although a storm destroyed much of the fleet. Fear of an invasion from China, as well as a continued fascination with Chinese culture, were important trends in Japan in the 13th century and beyond. Still, unfortunately, in the 14th and 15th centuries, Japan became unstable as rival nobles and elite samurai warriors fought for the control of the country. Japan had a ruling emperor for centuries, and according to Japanese legend, as far back as 660 BCE. However, since 1185 CE, the governor of Japan, and especially its military, was actually run by a powerful figure known as a shogun. And a shogun was basically a military dictator. Japan also would come to have a dynasty of shoguns known as the shogunate, which would rule. The emperor and the shogun, who actually ran the central government for the emperor, were increasingly powerless to stop violence in the provinces in Japan in the 14th and 15th centuries. Fierce fighting even spread to the capital of Kyoto on several occasions, leading to much of the city's destruction. From roughly 1467 until 1573, Japan was racked with warfare, and for nearly a century did not have an effective central government. Order was finally restored in 1603 with the rise of the Tokugawa shogunate, which would rule Japan and run its government from 1603 until 1868. the Tokugawa shogunate restored order to Japan. As we shall see later, however, it also would make crucial decisions about Japan's place in the world in the 16th century. So let's draw some conclusions in this video with a few points. China under the Ming Dynasty was easily the wealthiest, most populous, most powerful nation in the world. China was also technologically advanced. And as Zheng He's voyages show, China had the capacity to explore, even more so than the Europeans in the 15th century. Chinese culture had a huge influence on the rest of East Asia, especially Korea, but also Japan. Under the Ming Dynasty, however, China pulled back from the world and focused on defending itself from foreign invaders more than exploration or trade with the rest of the world. In the long run, this would cause China to increasingly fall behind European powers, both technologically and economically. This in turn had a profound impact on China's place in the world and the global balance of power. I'll stop with these concluding points. Thanks for watching.